everyone! How are you guys doing? I hope you're well, but if not, it's okay. But I hope you're trying your best to cope. I realize I haven't talked to you in a while. I haven't seen you in a while, except for those that I've been in constant communication with because of thesis or because of Psych Guild. So I hope we guys can get to catch up soon, and we probably will. Let's just wait for some announcements because we might get to have a Zoom session in the coming days. And before that, we are already in our last stretch here in Seminar in Psychometrics. So in the next couple of weeks, in the next few days, we will be discussing psychological assessment. So I will be uploading video lectures that are interactive so that we can get to review what we have learned in psychological assessment in our class in the previous year. Okay, so for this video lecture, I will be talking very briefly about psychological testing and assessment and their differences. And then we will proceed directly to ethics in psychological practice. So you might be wondering, Miss, aren't we going to be talking about history of psychological assessment and testing? Well, I don't want to bore you with something that you can read on your own. So if you're curious about that, if you want to refresh your memory on the history, you can just read up on it on our references. Okay? And another thing is that this video is interactive. So if you notice down below in the scroll bar, or what we call the scrubber, that slider thing that moves as the video progresses, there are annotations. So in various parts of this video, the video will stop when I ask a question, and you can place your answers in the bubble that will appear together with that annotation. There's an option to skip, but try your best to provide an answer. So there are two terms that we frequently interchange. And this is because some reference books would still use them interchangeably. But it is important for us to make a distinction between these two because technically they have different meanings. So what are these two terms? Of course, we have psychological testing and psychological assessment. So let's see what you remember. What is psychological testing? As defined in our main reference, Psychological Testing and Assessment by Cohen, psychological testing is the process of measuring psychology-related variables by means of devices or procedures designed to obtain a sample of behavior. As you can see, several of the terms have been highlighted. First off, we have the word measuring. When we measure something, we quantify how much of that variable does the test taker possess. Psychology-related variables pertain to a myriad of different things, from cognitive abilities like intelligence or creativity to personality, interests, attitudes, and so on and so forth. Devices or procedures pertain to the test itself, and there could be different types of tests depending on the variables that you're trying to measure. And finally, tests are limited because it can only obtain a sample of behavior. It doesn't seem possible to create a test whose items can tap into all of a person's behaviors. Psychological assessment, on the other hand, pertains to the gathering and integration of psychology-related data to make an evaluation accomplished through the use of tools such as tests, interviews, case studies, behavioral observation, and specially designed apparatuses and measurement procedures. This diagram shows you the relationship between testing and assessment. As you can see, tests can only show you a portion of the big picture, while assessment can gauge the totality. We can further distinguish between the two by looking at their differences in terms of objectives, the processes involved, the role of the evaluator, the skill needed from the evaluator, and their outcomes. If your goal is to gauge in numerical terms a person's ability or attribute, like for example, if you want to find out a person's IQ, then you may perform psychological testing. On the other hand, if your goal is to answer a referral question or to find a solution to a problem or to make a decision through the use of tools of evaluation, then you are performing psychological assessment. Psychological testing is flexible such that it may be administered individually or to a group. And then after the test administration, the test user will just typically add up the number of correct answers or the number of certain types of responses. And that's it. On the other hand, psychological assessment is typically individualized. And in contrast to testing, assessment more typically focuses on how an individual processes rather than simply the results of that processing. The evaluator has a small role in psychological testing. They're not key to the process. Essentially, you may replace an evaluator or a tester with someone else as long as they are able to follow instructions because the process of psychological testing is fairly straightforward. However, the assessor is key to the process of selecting tests and or other tools of evaluation as well as in drawing conclusions from the entire evaluation. So in psychological assessment, the role of the evaluator is crucial on different levels. As mentioned, testing typically requires only technician-like types of skills in terms of administering and scoring a test as well as in interpreting the results. On the other hand, assessment, being a multi-stage process, requires higher levels of skills, from the educated selection of tools to the thoughtful organization and integration of data. And finally, testing yields a test score or a series of test scores, while assessment entails a logical problem-solving approach that eventually could shed light on the referral question. So now that these distinctions have been clarified, from this point forward, we will be mainly talking about psychological assessment. Now, who are the parties involved in the assessment enterprise? First, we have the test developer, which basically create the tests or other methods of assessment. They can either be individuals or institutions or corporations like publishers. Once tests and other methods of assessment have been developed, a wide range of professionals may now obtain or purchase these assessment tools. So the second party in the assessment enterprise would be the test user. And we refer to the test user when we talk about clinicians, school psychologists, guidance counselors, consumer psychologists, market researchers, or any professional who may need assessment tools in their line of work. Test users may be allowed access only to certain types of assessment tools depending on their training, education, expertise, or credentials. The test taker could be your client, your patient, a job applicant, or a prospective student who's trying to get into a specific school. Basically, it's anyone who is the subject of an assessment or an evaluation. And finally, the society at large plays a significant role in the assessment enterprise. For example, as society evolves, there becomes a greater need to measure different psychological variables, and so test developers would have to respond to that need by devising new tests. So as I've mentioned, psychological tests and assessments can be used by a wide range of professionals like your clinicians, guidance counselors, psychologists, psychometricians, human resource personnel, social psychologists, experimental psychologists, and this is precisely because psychological tests and assessments are useful across a wide range of settings and contexts. So what are the settings and contexts where psychological testing and assessment has been found to be useful? As you know by now, psychological tests and assessments have a wide range of application within the educational or academic setting. For example, it can help the school identify children who may have special needs, who may have to be accommodated. It also evaluates accomplishment or the degree of learning that has taken place among the students, which is what we call the achievement test. It is also useful in admissions as it helps the school determine who among the hundreds or thousands of applicants should be admitted to the school. Or in placement to help the school determine who among the students can be accelerated to a higher level or who would need remedial classes or who can be placed in an advanced class. And in some cases, it can also help. And in some cases, if a student is struggling in school, psychological assessment can help pinpoint the problem so that interventions can be rolled out. In the industrial or organizational setting, psychological tests and or assessments are typically used by professionals in the human resources department, mostly for employment selection or hiring, but it can also be used to determine promotion eligibility or training eligibility. Regarding the latter two that I've mentioned, arriving at a sound decision is important because promoting an employee or training an employee entails having to spend the company or organizational resources. So, utilizing psychological testing and or assessment can provide additional basis for these kinds of decisions. In the clinical setting, psychological tests and or assessments are mostly used to diagnose psychological conditions or to rule out suspected psychological conditions. And ultimately, these are useful in determining the types of interventions that a patient or a client may need. There's also a wide range of applications within the forensic or legal context. For example, annulment and adoption cases would require all the parties involved to go through a psychological assessment to determine their psychological state and stability. And finally, in the medical or healthcare setting, psychological assessments or tests can help determine whether there is a psychosocial component to traditional medical conditions. Psychological tests and assessments may also give information that would help determine whether a patient would respond well to certain treatment plans or interventions. That being said, if you are a professional who conducts psychological testing and or assessment in any of these settings, then you have the responsibility to abide by the code of ethics. So if you have a copy now, take a look at it and you'll see that it is a long 28-pager document with different sections. But if you are a psychology professional, you're expected to be familiar with everything that's written there precisely because the Code of Ethics exists as a guide for the professional and how to conduct himself or herself professionally. So again, if you take a look at the document, you will find that the first part is the preface. This is where you'll find an account of how the current version of the Code of Ethics came about. And then after that, you'll find the Declaration of Principles, which states that psychology practitioners in the Philippines adhere to the Universal Declaration of Ethical Principles for Psychologists. And then after that is the preamble, And in a nutshell, it states that the objectives of the Universal Declaration is to provide a moral framework and generic set of ethical principles for psychology organizations worldwide as a means to first, evaluate the ethical and moral relevance of their code of ethics. Second, guide the development or evolution of their code of ethics. Third, encourage global thinking about ethics while also encouraging action that is sensitive and responsive to local needs and values. And fourth, speak with a collective voice on matters of ethical concern. And then these principles are discussed one by one. The first principle is respect for the dignity of persons and peoples, which is the most fundamental and universally recognized ethical principle that cuts across geographical and cultural boundaries and professional disciplines. And in accepting this, they also accept the following related values: respect for the unique worth and inherent dignity of all human beings, respect for the diversity among persons and peoples, respect for the customs and beliefs of cultures, to be limited only when a custom or a belief seriously contravenes the principle of respect for the dignity of persons or peoples or causes serious harm to their well-being. Free and informed consent, as culturally defined and relevant for individuals, families, groups, and communities. Privacy of individuals, families, groups, and communities. Protection of confidentiality of personal information of individuals, families, groups, and communities. And fairness and justice in the treatment of persons and peoples. The second principle is competent caring for the well-being of persons and peoples, which involves working for their benefit and, above all, doing no harm to them. In accepting this as fundamental, they also accept the following related values: active concern for the well-being of individuals, families, groups, and communities, ensuring that no harm is done to individuals, families, groups, and communities, maximizing benefits and minimizing potential harm to individuals, families, groups, and communities, correcting or offsetting harmful effects that have occurred as a result of their activities, developing and maintaining competence, self-knowledge regarding how their own values, attitudes, experiences, and social contexts influence their actions, interpretations, choices, and recommendations, and respect for the ability of individuals, families, groups, and communities to make decisions for themselves and to care for themselves and each other. The third principle is integrity. Integrity is vital to the advancement of scientific knowledge and to the maintenance of public confidence in the discipline of psychology. Again, in accepting this as fundamental, they also accept the following related values: honesty and truthful, open, and accurate communication, avoiding incomplete disclosure of information unless complete disclosure is culturally inappropriate or violates confidentiality or carries the potential to do serious harm to individuals, families, groups, or communities. Maximizing impartiality and minimizing biases, not exploiting persons or peoples for personal, professional, or financial gain, and avoiding conflicts of interest and declaring them when they cannot be avoided or are inappropriate to avoid. And finally, the fourth and last principle is professional and scientific responsibilities to society. Psychology functions as a discipline within the context of human society. As a science and a profession, it has responsibilities to society. These responsibilities include contributing knowledge about human behavior and to the person's understanding of themselves and others, and using such knowledge to improve the condition of individuals, families, groups, communities, and the society. In accepting this as fundamental, they also accept the following related values: the responsibility to increase scientific and professional knowledge in ways that allow the promotion of the well being of society and all its members, the responsibility to use psychological knowledge for beneficial purposes and to protect such knowledge from being misused, used incompetently, or made useless, the responsibility to conduct its affairs in ways that are ethical and consistent with the promotion of the well being of society and all its members, the responsibility to promote the highest ethical ideals in the performance of scientific, professional, and educational activities of its members, the responsibility to adequately train its members as regards their ethical responsibilities and required competencies, and the responsibility to develop its ethical awareness and sensitivity and to be as self correcting as possible. It is worth noting that these principles are more general and aspirational than they are specific and prescriptive. And they serve as the basis for the more specific behavioral guidelines for professionals. Another section in the Code of Ethics lists down the general ethical standards and procedures that describe the various aspects of the professional and scholarly activities of psychology practitioners. Very quickly, this covers topics pertaining to resolving ethical issues, standards of professional competence, human relations, confidentiality, advertisement and public statements, and records and fees. The Code of Ethics also lists down the ethical standards and procedures in specific functions, such as the areas of assessment, therapy, education and training, and research. And of course, since our subject is psychological assessment, we will be directing our focus on the assessment part of the Code of Ethics. But I won't be going through each and every one of the articles. It's up to you to do that. But I just want to make a quick rundown of the things that we have to consider more closely if you are looking at pursuing a career in psychological assessment, for example. In the area of assessment, the following are covered: the basis for assessment, informed consent in assessment, the use of assessment tools, obsolete and outdated test results, interpreting the assessment results, release of test data, explaining assessment results, test security, assessment by unqualified persons, and test construction. So, what are the things that we should keep in mind as an assessment professional? First, of course, is to develop a professional relationship with the client. What does that mean? This means that the nature, purpose, and conditions of the relationship should be clearly defined and explained prior to even beginning the assessment. This is to ensure that the relationship stays at a purely professional level and nothing beyond that. Prior to the assessment, you must inform the client about the following: the type and length of assessment that they would have to go through, alternative procedures that are available for them, details relating to appointment, nature and limits of confidentiality, and the financial requirements of going through the assessment. Next is to optimize the level of rapport with the client. We should always be mindful of our expectations and be careful with the expectancy effects. Now, how do you think a psychologist's expectations affect the client's performance? For one, expectations, while not verbalized, may show in nonverbals. And if the client is able to pick up on that, they may react to these nonverbal cues. This may then have an effect on their performance. For example, if a psychologist expects their client to perform really well in a cognitive abilities test, the client may pick up that expectation from the psychologist and be more pressured to answer the test. Another thing that we should be mindful of is the client's relative emotional state. While we are expected to maintain a professional stance, we should also remember that a testing situation may elicit anxiety among test takers. So, we should also be mindful of our attitude towards our clients. We should not be too strict, but also not be too lenient. A general balance is ideal. Another thing to always remember is to observe the rights to privacy. What do you think are the sort of information that some clients wish to keep private? Some examples of this would be sexual orientation or sexual behaviors, among other things. So, while our task in psychological assessment is to try to gather as much relevant information as possible to help us solve the problem or to help us answer the referral question, we must not force our client to reveal these information that they are not ready to share. Give only appropriate tests. This is where an expertise in selecting assessment tools come in. We must also inform our clients of the kinds of data that will be obtained from these assessment tools and the possible uses of these data. This next one is kind of tricky. Prevent and address inviolacy. What is inviolacy? Inviolacy happens when the client is asked to discuss information that he or she would rather not think about. Examples of these may be thoughts about death or dying, or traumatic experiences. So, what should a psychologist do if the client finds a test offensive and too intrusive? If the client verbalized their discomfort, or if you notice some hesitation in answering, then you may offer the client a way out. You may ask them if they would rather not answer the question, and you can give that to them. We should also observe ethical practice in labeling diagnosis. I have another question. Should we indicate our diagnosis or clinical impressions on our psychological evaluation report? What do you think? There's a great divide when it comes to this issue. Some who are not into labeling diagnosis may give arguments such as the following. Labels may stigmatize and limit the individual in his or her society because of this stigma. It may also become a self-fulfilling prophecy based on the expected roles that are attached to their diagnosis. And it may lead to feelings of helplessness. So in a way, being given a diagnosis may keep the patient or the client stuck in that position instead of moving forward. So that's one of the arguments by those who would rather not provide a diagnosis in their assessments. But then there are also those that are pro-labeling because it provides a standard language that professionals would understand. So when one professional, say for example, a psychologist refers the client to a psychiatrist, then they don't need to expound more on it. because the label or the diagnosis will stand? I guess first and foremost, we should make sure that the test user is competent in the use of assessment instruments. But how do we make sure that one has become a competent assessment practitioner? Most basic would be to get adequate training, which includes coursework and supervision. Coursework is good because it gives you the foundation when it comes to the theories. But actual work, internship, on-the-job training is also important, as well as supervision in your work, so that you become more familiar with the processes and so that you master handling the tests. Another thing that you can do is to bolster your knowledge of tests. So this means reading test manuals, keeping yourself updated of the new versions of tests, and reading up some more about results of studies that talk about these tests that you may use in your practice. So what are the specific skills required in assessment? First, you must have an ability to evaluate technical strengths and limitations of a test. This refers to the reliability and validity of tests, which is connected to the third one, knowledge of issues relating to the test's reliability and validity, which in turn could give you a solid basis for selecting appropriate tests. Then, you must also have that ability to interpret with diverse populations, because you'll never know who your next client would be and what their background would be. You must also have an awareness of the material in the test manual. And finally, a knowledge of when to consult, because it's not all the time that we are knowledgeable of the test materials that we use. So we must learn when to consult from a supervisor. In psychological assessment in particular, we do not interpret test results on its own. What else do we consider? While we consider the norms in interpreting test results, especially numerical test results, we also have to consider the unique characteristics of the person combined with the relevant aspects of the test itself. So we cannot make an evaluation on the sole basis of the test result. We must also look at other information obtained from interviews or from other assessment tools. And then after completing an assessment, we must always maintain test security and assessment information. What do you think will happen when tests are made readily available to the public? When tests are made readily available to the public, like for example, if you take a photo of it and share it on social media, or when it is uploaded in the internet and you make it open access when it should not be open access, then it lowers the value of the test. Basically, it makes it worthless because it allows the public to practice the test. And why would that be a problem? If they are able to gain access to the test and practice the tests, then you won't be able to accurately measure whatever ability it is or attribute it is that you're trying to measure. So most of what I have mentioned can also be found in the Code of Ethics, but the rest are just helpful tips to make the most out of your testing or assessment session with a client. Now, we have come to the part where you can apply what you have learned from the Code of Ethics. Now, if you haven't really read up on the Code of Ethics yet, I highly encourage you to do that first before proceeding with this video, because it would help you once we show each of the case vignettes to not scramble looking for the section or the articles that can give you justification for your answers. So I have here with me 15 cases, and I know 15 cases sounds a lot, but I made sure to choose cases that would encompass the different areas in psychological practice and the different situations that you may encounter in these different areas. So all of these cases were adapted from the AATBS Ethics Domain Quiz. And AATBS stands for the Association for Advanced Training in the Behavioral Sciences. It's an organization that seeks to enhance the skills of mental health professionals through highly effective educational content on conceptual knowledge relevant to their professions. So they have supported mental health professionals in the US and in Canada by providing licensure exam preparation materials. I also made sure to choose cases that are relevant for our context, so no need to worry about that. Okay, so let's start. So when you answer the questions that will follow, you may refer to all the other sections of the PAP Code of Ethics and not just the one that concerns assessment. Okay? And again, you may key in your answers in the annotation boxes that will pop out from the scroll bar down below when the video gets paused. Okay? So, good luck. And after every question, I will be discussing the answers. Case number 1. You're working with a couple in marital therapy and are conducting the initial interview. You realize that although the husband doesn't remember you, the two of you once dated. You should A. Speak to the husband alone, explain the situation, and ask him if he feels comfortable with proceeding. B. See the wife in individual therapy only. C. Refer the couple to another therapist. Or D. Let the couple know the situation and then proceed with therapy. So the answer is C. Refer the couple to another therapist. You have to remember that you're not obliged to provide services for all your referrals. According to the 2017 edition of the PAP Code of Ethics under General Ethical Standards and Procedures, Human Relations, multiple relationship occurs when a psychology practitioner is in a professional role with a person and at the same time is in another role with the same person, is in a relationship with a person closely associated with or related to the person with whom the psychology practitioner has a professional relationship with, or is likely to enter into a future relationship with that client or patient, or a person closely associated with or related to that client or patient. So you need to refer this couple to one of your competent colleagues. Case number 2. While attending a staff meeting at the mental health facility where you work, you learn that one of your colleagues, a psychologist, is behaving in an unethical manner toward one of her patients. Despite being advised to do so by several members of the staff, she states that she will not change her behavior. What should you do in this situation? A. Approach the colleague individually and urge her to change her behavior. If she refuses, report her to the appropriate ethics committee. B. Approach the colleague individually and urge her to change her behavior. If she refuses, recommend to the director of the facility that she be fired. C. Report the colleague to the appropriate ethics committee immediately since she has already stated that she will not change her behavior. Or D. Announce in the staff meeting that you want to go on the record as noting that the psychologist is behaving unethically. And the answer is A. Approach the colleague individually and urge her to change her behavior. And if she refuses, you have to report her to the appropriate ethics committee. But let me clarify that for a bit. if we are using the 2008-2009 version of the PAP Code of Ethics, under General Ethical Standards and Procedures, Resolving Ethical Issues, you will find informal resolution of ethical violations. This states that when we become aware that another psychologist violated our code of ethics, we may resolve the issue by bringing it to the attention of the psychologist. And we do so if informal resolution is sufficient and if the intervention does not violate confidentiality rights of the client. We can also use reporting ethical violations to argue for our decision. It states that if there is a likelihood to have substantial harm to a person or an organization, we take further action to report violation of the Code of Ethics to appropriate institutional authorities. However, this does not apply when an intervention would violate confidentiality rights or when we are called to review the work of another psychologist whose professional conduct is in question. So basically, it's telling us that you should deal with ethical violations by another psychologist in an informal manner first by bringing it to their attention. And a report to an ethics committee should be made when the attempt at informal resolution has failed or if the violation is not amenable to informal resolution. So you should attempt to speak to the psychologist privately first and report her to the ethics committee if she still refuses to change her behavior. Now, interestingly, in the 2017 version of the Code of Ethics, there's no mention of an informal resolution. So this means that you can go ahead and report the psychologist without bothering to talk to him or her. Case number 3. A manufacturing company hires a psychologist to screen job applicants using standardized cognitive ability tests. The company then asks the psychologist to train their human resources staff to administer and score the tests. The psychologist should A. Agree to do so if the psychologist is able to provide adequate training to the staff. B. Agree to do so if the psychologist is able to supervise the human resources staff. C. Refuse to do so because cognitive ability tests are not valid predictors of job performance. Or D. Refuse to do so because the human resources staff lacks the appropriate qualifications. And the correct answer is D. Refuse to do so because the human resources staff may lack the appropriate qualifications to do so. The assumption here is that the human resources staff lacks the appropriate qualifications. According to the 2017 version of the PAP Code of Ethics, under ethical standards and procedures in specific functions, particularly in assessment by unqualified persons, psychology practitioners shall ensure that test protocols, their interpretations, and all other records are kept secured from unqualified persons. Case number 4. A psychology instructor gives a battery of psychological tests to some of his students who volunteered to be participants. Based on these tests, he finds that one of the participants is at risk for emotional disturbance. He talks to the student and suggests counseling. At the same time, he informs the director of the college counseling office, who is a friend of his. According to the PAP Code of Ethics, the professor acted A. Unethically because he revealed this information to a third party, B. Ethically because he acted in accord with the student's welfare, C. Ethically because he had responsibilities to the college as well as to the student, or D. Unethically because he isn't a clinician. The right answer is A. The professor acted unethically because he revealed this information to a third party. This is unethical because the director of the college counseling office is a third party. And this is not an emergency situation characterized by imminent danger or harm. so it is uncalled for. You may find the arguments for that under the general ethical standards and procedures, confidentiality, disclosures. Case number 5. Dr. Topacio is seeing Mario in therapy for 4 months. For the last month, Mario has complained about the progress he is making in therapy, and Dr. Topacio has responded by working with him to modify treatment goals. In the last therapy session, however, Mario again stated that he is not happy with therapy. Dr. Topacio's best course of action would be to A. Recognize that Mario's concerns are a normal reaction to the changes he is making as the result of therapy. B. Make a clinical decision as to whether or not Mario is actually benefiting from therapy, and if he is, encourage him to continue with therapy for at least several more sessions. C. Discuss Mario's continued dissatisfaction with him and the possibility of terminating therapy. Or D. Tell Mario that she is ethically required to terminate therapy with him since he is not satisfied with the progress he is making. The correct answer is C. Discuss Jeff's continued dissatisfaction with him and the possibility of terminating the therapy. Under ethical standards and procedures in specific functions, specifically in therapy, psychologists shall terminate therapy when they are fairly certain that their client no longer needs the therapy, is not likely to benefit from therapy, or would be harmed by continued therapy. This is applicable because Dr. Topacio in this situation has tried modifying the treatment goals to no avail. Thus, terminating therapy may be the next logical step given Mario's continued dissatisfaction. Case number 6. You have a client who does not want their records released under any circumstances. The attorney has subpoenaed you. Your best course of action is to A. Respond in person but don't take the records. B. Take the records but don't turn them over. C. Ignore the entire matter. Or D. Destroy the records. The answer is B. Take the records but don't turn them over. Take note that a subpoena requires a person to appear at a designated time and place with a copy of the records, but it does not necessarily require the person to release those records. I actually consulted a lawyer friend about this, and while this is court mandated, it is not part of any routine procedure similar to annulment cases or adoption cases. So the therapist can assert client-therapist privilege and may also invoke privilege for the exclusion of the report as an evidence. So there is really no need to turn them over, and you should not actually release any information in the records unless the judge orders you to do so. Case number 7. A 16-year-old girl tells her therapist that she wants to kill herself and that she's been thinking of using her mother's prescription pain pills to overdose. The therapist then tells her that he will have to tell her parents about her suicide risk. The girl becomes enraged and says that she would not have disclosed the information if she knew that the therapist would tell her parents. The therapist should A. Agree not to tell the parents if the girl agrees to a no-harm contract. B. Agree not to tell her parents but tell them without the girl's knowledge. C. Tell the parents and refer the girl to another therapist because she will probably not be able to trust the therapist again. Or D. Tell the parents and apologize to the girl for having to do so. The answer is D. Tell the parents and apologize to the girl for having to do so. Under general ethical standards and procedures, in confidentiality, there are limitations to confidentiality. And one of these limitations is when there is imminent danger to the individual or to the community, or both. Thus, you are bound both by ethics and by law to disclose confidential information without the client's consent to protect them from harm. This applies to minors and adults alike. So, in this case, it would be most appropriate to inform the girl's parents about her suicide risk and then just apologize to the girl for having to do so. You should also be able to explain that this is part of the protocol, and given the apparent level of risk involved, it would probably not be sufficient to rely on a no harm contract. Of course, it would be a no-go to lie to the client, and it may not be necessary to refer the client. And if handled empathically, there is high chance that the girl will come to understand the therapist's reasons for disclosing to the parents about her suicide risk and may come to appreciate that it was only her safety that was the concern. Case number 8. A psychologist is writing a book for popular distribution and illustrates the section on projective personality tests with a number of pictures used in the hand test. This use of test materials in this way is A. Clearly unethical because it compromises the usefulness of the test. B. Ethical only if the publisher of the book has accepted responsibility for including the pictures. C. Ethical since the hand test is not commonly used psychological test. Or D. Professionally questionable but not covered by ethical guidelines. The answer is A. It is clearly unethical because it compromises the usefulness of the hand test. Under ethical standards and procedures in specific functions, specifically in assessment, under test security, the administration and handling of all test materials, including manuals, keys, answer sheets, reusable test booklets, and others, shall be handled by qualified users or personnel. In this case, when the actual pictures of items in the hand test are made public, then they're already in the hands of unqualified individuals. This is clearly unethical because it compromises the usefulness of the test. It also diminishes its value. Case number 9. The mother of a 31-year-old client that you have been seeing for 6 months calls to check on her son's progress. She says that she's very concerned about her son and wants to know if there's anything she can do to help him. As an ethical psychologist, you A. Advise her in general terms about how she can help her son. B. Suggest that she can make an appointment so you can discuss the matter in person. C. Suggest that she come to therapy with her son at his next appointment. Or D. Tell her that you cannot discuss her son's condition with her. The answer is D. Tell her that you cannot discuss her son's condition with her. Giving the mother any information about her adult son would represent a breach of his confidentiality. Therefore, this is the best answer of those given. This question addresses the issue of client confidentiality, which states that psychology practitioners shall regard confidentiality as an obligation that arises from the client's trust. Psychology practitioners shall therefore restrict the disclosure of information about their clients except when mandated by law. Furthermore, psychology practitioners shall release information to appropriate individuals or authorities only except when there is imminent danger to the individual and the community. And in this case, this is not the situation. Case number 10. You have been hired to assist with a research project on process variables in group psychotherapy. The psychologist, who is the principal investigator, tells you to discourage participants from leaving the group prior to the end of the study because if too many participants drop out, the study's potential usefulness will be seriously compromised. As an ethical psychologist, you should A. Refuse to assist with a research project. B. Immediately file a complaint against the psychologist with the Psychology Licensing Board or Ethics Committee. C. Write a letter to the psychologist indicating the relevant ethical standards and offering to discuss the matter with him. D. Follow the psychologist's instructions since by discouraging participants from leaving the group, you're not actually coercing them to participate. The correct answer here is C. You should write a letter to the psychologist indicating the relevant ethical standards and offering to discuss the matter with him. This is the best answer because by offering to discuss the matter with the psychologist, you're attempting to resolve the matter informally. Again, we're referring here to the 2008-2009 version of the PAP Code of Ethics. So this is consistent with the requirements of the said ethical guidelines. But if we are referring to the 2017 version, probably the best answer is B, which is to immediately file a complaint against the psychologist with the Psychology Licensing Board or Ethics Committee. But the underlying explanation to that could be explained by the articles under research, under informed consent to research, which states that psychology practitioners shall not merely ask participants to sign in the consent form. They should also recognize that informed consent must be based on the willingness of the participants to work collaboratively with them. And when obtaining informed consent, it is the duty of the psychology practitioners to inform the research participant about the right to decline to participate and to withdraw from the research once participation has begun. Case number 11. After 3 sessions with a therapy client, Dr. Simon realizes that he's feeling somewhat hostile toward the client because she reminds him of his wife, who he is currently divorcing. Dr. Simon's best course of action would be to A. Refer the client to another therapist without telling the client the reason for the referral. B. Refer the client to another therapist after discussing the reason with her. C. Recognize that his feelings are the result of countertransference and continue to work with the client. Or D. Consult with another psychologist to determine whether or not to continue seeing the client in therapy. Okay, so what should Dr. Simon do? The correct answer is D. Consult with another psychologist to determine whether or not to continue seeing the client in therapy. Consultation with another professional is ordinarily the best course of action whenever a therapist is concerned that a personal problem might interfere with his or her ability to provide a client with adequate therapy. In this situation, Dr. Simon's personal problems may be affecting his objectivity. Psychology practitioners shall refrain from initiating an activity when they know or anticipate that there is a substantial likelihood that their personal problems or schedules will prevent them from performing such activities in a competent or sustained manner. Furthermore, when the psychology practitioners shall become aware of personal problems that may interfere with the performance of work-related duties, they shall take appropriate measures such as obtaining professional consultation or assistance, making referrals, and determining whether they should limit, suspend, or terminate these work-related duties. Case number 12. A psychologist in private practice is going through a difficult divorce and as a result has started drinking and is often depressed. He should A. Plunge deeper into his work to take his mind off his own problems. B. Seek professional consultation and consider temporarily suspending his practice. C. Explain the situation to his clients and offer to refer them to other therapists. Or D. Immediately refer his clients to other therapists. What's the correct answer? The answer for this is B. Seek professional consultation and consider temporarily suspending his practice. The same argumentation that we used in case number 11 may also be used in this situation as well. Case number 13. Dr. Ang, a licensed psychologist, has been contacted by a company to evaluate job applicants. The job will involve administering projective tests to determine if applicants for an accountant job have a homosexual orientation. Dr. Ang should A. Not accept the job because the evaluation she's being requested to conduct represents an invasion of privacy. B. Not accept this job because projective tests have been shown to be unreliable and invalid. C. Accept the job and administer the test as required but explain the purpose to all applicants before doing so. Or D. Accept the job, administer the test as requested, and report the results to the company. Alright, so what's the answer to this question? The right answer is A. Dr. Ang should not accept the job because the evaluation she's being requested to conduct represents an invasion of privacy. This is a tricky question because it requires us to go beyond the coverage of the Code of Ethics. First off, we should realize that projective tests may reveal hidden internal conflicts without the participant's knowledge by projecting them onto the test. This may unintentionally out the applicant's sexual orientation, and this is an example of an invasion of privacy. Locally, we now have the Data Privacy Act, which may protect the individual because sexual orientation doesn't have to be disclosed by the applicant because it's not relevant to the job. The Magna Carta of Women, RA 9710, also states that no one should suffer discrimination on the basis of any status, which includes sexual orientation. Thus, the purpose of administering the test is also questionable because employment selection decision based on sexual orientation is discrimination. Case number 14. You believe that one of your clients is exhibiting symptoms of PTSD. A new test for PTSD has been developed by a psychologist at the local university, and you would like to use the test to evaluate the client. However, the test is currently labeled for research purposes only. You should A. Get permission to use the test from the psychologist who developed it. B. Get an informed consent from the client before administering the test. C. Make sure that you combine test results with other data you have collected. Or D. Not use the test. So the answer to this item is very obvious. Of course, it is D. Simply do not use the test because it is indicated that it is for research purposes only. Under ethical standards and procedures in specific functions in assessment, in the section on assessment tools, it is stated that psychology practitioners shall use data collection methods and procedures that are consistent with current scientific and professional developments. While this newly developed test for PTSD would satisfy that, we also have the statement that says psychology practitioners shall use assessment tools of which the validity and reliability have been established. When this is not possible, they shall describe the advantages and limitations of test results and interpretations. This makes the test inappropriate for use with paying clients because it is explicitly stated that it should be used for research purposes only, which may imply that validity and reliability may have not been established. Case number 15. A psychologist decides to use a computerized test service to facilitate scoring and interpretation of the MMPI-2, which he frequently administers to his clients. The psychologist should be aware that A. The use of computerized interpretations is prohibited by ethical guidelines. B. Computerized scoring and interpretation services are notoriously unreliable. C. Computerized interpretations should always be supplemented with other information obtained by the psychologist. Or D. Because of their objectivity, computerized interpretations are preferable to subjective interpretations. And finally, for this last item, the correct answer is C. Computerized interpretations should always be supplemented with other information obtained by the psychologist. Alright. In interpreting assessment results, psychology practitioners shall interpret assessment results while considering the purpose of the assessment and other factors such as the client's test-taking abilities, characteristics, situational, personal, and cultural differences. In this case, when using a computerized test service to help score and interpret test data, it is usually the case that the reports that are being generated are in general terms. They are not specifically tailored to the client. And so you would need additional information that the psychologist has obtained from the client, which may come from either the behavioral observations or interview data or other assessment tools. Okay, so we have finished all 15 case vignettes, and hopefully you got to practice applying what you learned from the Code of Ethics to these hypothetical situations so that when you answer the questions in the board exam, I know these questions would sound tricky because some of them you might think to do, but all you have to remember is to stick with what's written in the Code of Ethics so you won't get too confused. And if you need some more time to comprehend the lecture thoroughly, then you can just replay this video again and go over each of the case vignettes as well as the explanations for the answers. And after that, we will have a quiz on ethics so you can master the Code of Ethics and how to apply it to hypothetical situations. And that will be the last quiz that I will be giving you. I won't be giving you any more quizzes for the succeeding video lectures that I will be uploading. Okay? So, yeah, that's it for today's lecture. And I'll see you again on my next video. Bye, guys!